So, hello and welcome. My name is Amy Nernberger, and I am one of the co-hosts of the ETHRD interest group, which is the short way, I think, of saying Education and Training on Handling Research Data interest group within RDA. And we are delighted to have you be part of our session today. It's really great to see everyone here. And I would once again invite you to go ahead and open up that notes document, enter your name. You'll also notice some of the other links in there that will point you to the presentations that are being given today, as well as all of the slide decks and things like that in those spaces. So if you need to access those slides to follow along during the presentations, I certainly encourage you to do that if that makes it easier for you. So one of the other things today, we are going to be using Slido.com during some parts of this session. So please go ahead and open that up. We have kind of a test question up right now to see how this goes, make sure it is working and is all in order. So with that, I will just go ahead and, oh, here we go. We have a lot of people from Germany. Welcome, Germany. We have some people from South Korea, the US, Korea itself, Australia. Welcome, one and all. We're really happy to have you here today at this session. So before we get started, as you've probably already been informed, the session is being recorded, and your participation in the session is permission to disseminate this recording. Please, if you're not speaking, go ahead and mute yourself. Just for the ease of everyone, we always have some unexpected background noise otherwise, and so I welcome you to do that. But if you do want to speak up, go ahead and raise your hand during the session or use chat. We also are accepting questions through the Slido app as well. So before we so there you go for that. And one more time, I'm going to go ahead and put the notes information in there, as well as the Slido information in there for anyone who is joining us right now. All right. Well, a quick overview of our agenda for today's session. I'll start out with a quick introduction of the past work of this interest group, and then really move right into a set of quick-fire presentations about what's going on in the community right now in that space of education and learning initiatives. And as part of that, we'll be hearing from the Stokes from ARDC, talking about their experience with a Carpentries partnership in 2022. Then we'll be hearing from Hugh Shanahan and the Handbook on Fair in Higher Education. Moving from Hugh onto Teresa Kalova, and my apologies, please step in and correct my pronunciation for that, talking about their experience with the certificate course on data stewardship. And moving on to Luigia, Cristiana, and their experience with a pilot training course at the Helmholtz Institute. And then finally, following that up with, finishing up with a presentation from Nancy Hübel-Heinrich, who has been a really leading light in some of the work that this group has done over the past 2 years, year and a half or so around metadata for learning resources. And then after that, we'll have a time for community feedback, questions for the presenters, and discussion. So I ask everyone to hold their questions until we get to the end of presentations, and then we'll open up the floor for questions to the different presenters and ideas. And then at the end of the session, what we're really looking for is future areas of work as we move into the next area of what this group can do. What is the global community interested in this space, thinking about education and training and handling of research data? And as I mentioned before, that brainstorming topic at Slido.com is open through this entire session. So if you have an idea that pops up during that, please feel free to enter it there at any time, and we'll get to those as we move through. So with that, just a quick introduction to the group itself. Like I said, this group is really focused on thinking about education and training in the space of all of the different ways that research data is dealt with, is handled, whether that's through those aspects of data science, which we've produced recommendations on before, or in the space of managing our learning resources, which is what our current work has really been focused on. Through the last set of plenaries, we really started this recent push out at Plenary 15, where we collected ideas, moved into Plenary 16, the virtual Plenary 16, where we had the first presentation of some of those outputs, and Plenary 17 with really a working session to finalize those outputs and make sure that they were matching the community needs that were expressed and that we heard in those spaces. Plenary 18, we had a final formal presentation of those outputs and starting to collect some new ideas. And here we are. We find ourselves at Plenary 19 and with the will to start the cycle all over again and really come back to the community to hear what you've been doing, hear from each other in these spaces, what's the work that's been going on, what's been productive, what you're seeing gaps around, and where we can work together to start addressing to continue, in fact, addressing some of those gaps. So I'd like to draw your attention both to the wiki for this group, as well as some of the recent recommendations. We had two focus groups. One was looking at the core characteristics of learning resource collectors. So thinking about learning resource collectors as those either platforms or other learning providers who are gathering together learning materials, learning resources, and redistributing them or making them available for other uses. And then the other focus group was really looking at recommendations for minimal metadata set to aid in that discovery of learning resources, really addressing the first two letters of FAIR, the findable and the accessibility of learning resources. And you'll hear more about that from either Nancy or, fingers crossed, Nancy. If it's not Nancy, it's going to be me. If you're looking for the links that are on the slides, these slides, I apologize, I'm presenting from one screen today, so I can't actually put those links into chat, but please do go ahead and access those slides in the folder that is linked in the notes, and you should be able to get all of the links from there. So I encourage you to take a look at the materials that are available in that space. So as I mentioned before, as we move into the presentations, I encourage you to enter your questions for the presenters into the Slido space for presenter questions, and then we'll return to this as we move into the discussion period. And without, hopefully, further ado, I've moved ahead of myself. Liz, I am going to turn it over to you to talk about the Carpentries partnership for 2022. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite you to share yours.
Thank you, Amy, and what a wonderful introduction to this session. I really have to say how wonderful, how much I've enjoyed this conference, and I'm terrified that I'm going to go over 8 minutes. So feel free to mute me at the 8-minute mark so that we can continue. Okay, well, let's go then. Hello, my name is Liz Stokes. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and I'm here to champion the ARDC Carpentries Instructor Train the Trainer program, share challenges and successes there. I would like to share my expert opinion that open educational resources are great, but people need to know how to use them, and underscore the importance of administrative support and trainer expertise in putting exemplar materials to good use. As is customary in Australia, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which I'm presenting today. I live in the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation. Aboriginal sovereignty has not been ceded in this country. I pay my respect to custodians of land and knowledge held therein, and I welcome any First Nations people here today. I acknowledge the past in order to change the future. So I'd like to ask people here today, what is the problem we are trying to solve? Skills and workforce development for the higher education sector increasingly needs to cope with recognising software and data skills as we generate more and more data. This Rubik's Cube is a useful idea to think about. People talk about how the best skills training is modular, customisable and fair. I agree with this, but without the skilled expertise to deliver this kind of training, they are useless. I guess it's a little bit like data. The point of my talk is to shift the attention away from solving the Rubik's Cube of resource development and onto how we are working together to solve the Rubik's Cube. For those of you unfamiliar with the ARDC, I would like to show you the other components of our multifaceted organisation. We're a government investment under the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Scheme. You can see the logo down in the bottom right corner. And my skills and workforce development team sits under the first column on the left, people and policy. I like to say that unless people have the skills to use this infrastructure, that investment is wasted. One thing we wanted to do at the ARDC is to uplift the Australian e-research and digital skills trainer community. We have partnered with the Carpentries to offer a big multi-organisational membership to provide instructor training to researchers and the people who support them. Here is a quick introduction to the Carpentries that you can pore over later. I've also got some slides at the end of this presentation that can give you a deeper experience in the Carpentries. Suffice to say that it is a non-profit organisation that trains people in software development and data science skills, and they build community and local capacity through a Train the Trainer program. They're US grant funded, and member organisations pay membership fees on an annual basis. So why did we choose the Carpentries to uplift our trainer community? Well, let's look at the market landscape for digital skills training against two key drivers. For us, the Carpentries come out on top in both open and reproducible methods, and also their community and collaborative opportunities. Some of you may be unfamiliar with ResBaz, the Research Bazaar festivals, but I would like to explain that both ResBaz and the Carpentries offer networking and collaboration. These initiatives pay attention to the social nature of learning and doing research, and that's personally why I maintain my interest in those organisations. So why would we do a partnership? The first reason we initiated a partnership was because individual organisational memberships were not growing the community beyond those organisations. So a local coordination is inherent in a partnership, because we wanted to renew and also grow the trainer community. There are about 100 trainers, 100 instructors listed on the Carpentries website, but not all of these are currently active. We wanted to encourage collaboration between institutions and broker relationships. And ultimately, we want to build capacity for research, digital research skills among Australian researchers and service providers through increasing the efficacy of their training efforts, okay? I need to explain the motorcycle analogy that I have very recently dreamed up. So for me, the researcher is riding the motorcycle. The support service provider is in the sidecar with supplementary instruments. You could look closely and maybe make a joke about whether or not that canine is a golden retriever, but that's a library joke that I don't probably have enough time to go into. So if if both of these sentient beings are not in agreement of the direction or the road, there'll be problems. Carpentries instructor training helps both roles develop a shared language and complementary skills. Let me start telling you about our partnership and move into covering some of the challenges and successes that we've had so far. So our organisation takes out an annual membership on behalf of several institutions. Our current members, as you can see here, include the Queensland Cyber Infrastructure Foundation, QCIF, and Intersect, which are the two major training organisations in Australia, and both of them have roughly around 11 member institutions themselves. So their reach is much broader than perhaps one city or one state. We also have two major high performance compute centres, PAWSI and NCI, and we have representation from universities from west through to east, Eastern Australia, and our research infrastructure organisations, ARDC and ARNet there. The new kids on the block are the Burnett Institute, which is a medical research institute, and AIMS, the Australian Institute of Marine Science. So I'm pleased to say that so far our founding members have national coverage across universities, infrastructure, and training organisations. Features of this are that members pay a low fee for instructor training per seat. Some organisations can claim a discount for providing a Carpentries trainer of instructors, like myself. We co-organise instructor training workshops. We have a program of 5 workshops of 25 people capacity throughout the year, and the partnership undertakes to shepherd those instructors through the certification process. The partnership meets monthly. We have 4 trainers on our books, and from a sort of initial expectations about 70 instructor training seats, we are up to almost 100. So I'm very excited, and I'll talk a bit more about the success in that slide once I get to it. But let's talk about challenges and some candid confessions. So the first one is finding a good balance. International community is nice to have, but we don't want, we've found a tension between making seats available to the international community, as well as getting our seats from our partnership through the process. So, and that leads me to my next point, which is about succession planning. So this year has been about an establishment phase, and during that phase, I have worn a lot of hats. So I'm looking forward next year to being able to diversify the leadership, trainer, and secretariat roles. Collaboration. It's abundantly clear that new member organisations need help to set up the administration and outreach to support their instructors. Here, our training organisation members can show institutions how it's done, and our ARDC's collaborative DRISA website, which is a training portal, can provide a platform for newly minted instructors to find each other and share resources. I've just realised that I've completely gone over time, and I am going to leave.
You have not gone over time.
Haven't
you
I?
have a minute left.
Oh, 1 minute.
Oh,
okay.
One
great.
more minute. Go.
Thank you. Okay. So growing the community so our initial founding partners probably won't have the same number of instructors this year. So we have more of an impetus to reach out more broadly. And I think it's through research centres that we're actually going to find that uptake, probably more than individual libraries, but perhaps there's opportunity through library associations. These are our successes. So we've got new partners on the block. We indeed have reached a 40% increase in expected demand. We have really positive feedback from the people who've participated in this instructor train the trainer program so far. And what I'm really excited about is that it gives us an opportunity to grow future ARDC infrastructure champions, because the pedagogical expertise that people are learning won't apply only to Carpentries curriculum, but can be extended beyond to inform our product and service development, as well as other initiatives.
Thank you very much for that, Liz. Really appreciate it, and perfectly finished on time. So again, please enter your questions for the presenters at the Slido, or go ahead and enter them into the little question box in the notes. At this point, Hugh, I invite you to take over the screen share and take it away.
Right. Thanks very much, Amy. Okay, so good afternoon, good evening, and good middle of the night for some of you very heroic people. I again just want to state the same thing that Liz has said. Amy just cut me off after 8 minutes. I've not switched on my timer, so please just be brutal about it. Just let me share my screen. Sorry for being disorganized. Okay, great. I'm actually on the right page. So, oh, and of course, my laptop decides to be really tough. Okay, there we go. So I hope everybody can see that. Normally I rattle on about the CoData RDA schools, so it's really nice to be able to talk about something else for a change. Today, over this period, I want to talk about a handbook that was developed, which has got the catchy title of How to Be Fair with Your Data, a teaching and training handbook for higher education institutions. This is something that was developed as part of the FAIR's FAIR project, now sadly expired, but it's very important to note that this was very much a cross-community effort. Likewise, I am saying this on behalf of the FAIR Handbook editorial team, which is a very, very polite way of saying that other people basically put together the slides and I get to just push the buttons, all right? Okay, so the first two slides is a little bit of a chance just to talk about the handbook itself. So as you said, one of the goals of FAIR's FAIR was to produce a textbook that higher education institutions, or HEIs, could use in terms of how to make use of FAIR, how to teach it, and so on. And we're providing guidance and practical support. And I think that's really, really important in terms of integrating FAIR principles and related content into developing curricula and teaching. This is now available and it's on a variety of different channels. So it's available as a book. The University of Göttingen Press is there. If you want to spend €40 on it to get a hard copy, you're very welcome. There's also, but if you go to that site, it's freely downloadable. There's also a more formal, if you're into, you know, if you're a relentless EU Horizon Europe type person, you can look for the official output. The thing I think that's most interesting, and my apologies, this is still a kind of a temporary URL, but there is a Gitbook version of this, and here's the front page of that Gitbook. It will ultimately, there will be a gitbook.fairsfair link, and I'm sorry that we still don't have that in place. But this is the front page of the Gitbook, and the important thing to note is to say this can be updated going forward very easily. So that's the main thing I wanted to point out in terms of how to find that. Okay, so what's covered in the handbook? I guess there's basically four major chunks. So first part is a chapter on sort of a competencies framework for FAIR skills. The next chapter is teaching and training designs for FAIR. So in particular, sort of saying, okay, how do you explain what FAIR is to people from first principles? Chapter 5, I think, is the one that I'm, from my own perspective, goes, oh yeah, that's really useful, which is a set of 16 lesson plans on different topics in terms of FAIR. I will be sneaky and actually even momentarily just show, let me just pick one example of that if my screen allows me to. No, oh yeah, there you go. So here's, for example, one lesson plan discussing IPR issues, for example. And here's here's the list of the lesson plans that we have over here so far. Also, we have another chapter which is discussing, okay, more practical advice in terms of how do you implement FAIR in your institution. So let me switch in terms of talking about the content. And Amy, just to say, am I running over yet?
3 minutes.
Okay, good. So this is where, let me talk first about the future of this. So FAIR is now done, but going forward, it's clear that this should be seen as a first step. Now, we can of course go for, oh, okay, revised editions of the handbook, you know, that we get Göttingen to print again, but we've got the Gitbook structure. So it could be done in a much more sort of evolved fashion. And I think that's the way that's there. as I stress, it's a community effort. There was something like 42 authors who were involved in that in terms of multiple sprints and a small editorial team. I think in particular, I do bang on about the lesson plans, but that's, I think, as people kind of add in, you know, people could easily add in more lesson plans in there, and that would be something that would be really, really useful. And because it's in a Git book format, that can be easily slotted in with a, you know, light touch level of editorial control. So this is the bit where I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and looking at this group and smiling sweetly, basically. So number one is, it would be good to see if this handbook, for example, could be seen as an official output of the RDA. We will be setting up a survey to sort of see how people are people actually making use of it, so we can track that use thereof. And it's say, in the future, could this group be a proposer for that? As we know, some of the original editorial team would be happy to carry on sort of doing that editorial role, but we're reaching out to various people to say, if you're interested, if you have time to
1 minute.
Thanks, Amy, to actually be involved in that, we'd be delighted to hear about that. So just the last thing to say is, obviously, if you have any questions, that's good. If you have interests or follow-up questions, please feel free to email me, or likewise Claudia Engelhardt, who's based now in Dresden, is really been the person who's been doing a heroic amount of work in terms of running it. I basically stole all her slides here. So that's that's also a good point of contact. And with that, I'll wrap up.
Thank you so much for that, Hugh. Really appreciated that overview of the handbook on FAIR in higher education. Like I said in comments, I've already been using it myself, both for a class I taught as well as our own group's professional development. So thank you for introducing it to this group, as well as if you didn't already know. Again, if you have questions for any of the presenters, please head on over to Slido to put those in. I'll also be reviewing both chat and the question box. But with that, let's go ahead and move on to Teresa, please. The screen share is yours. Please take it away. Can't wait to hear about the certificate course for data stewards.
Right, thank you, Amy. So, hi everyone, my name is Teresa and I work at the Vienna University Library, which is part of the University of Vienna. And I'm very excited to talk to you today about our new certificate course, Data Steward. Okay. Right, there we go. So the big question is, why do we need a course specifically for data stewards? You might be familiar with this quote by Baden Mons that we will need to educate around 500,000 data stewards in Europe alone to help researchers with their data management needs. So we asked ourselves in Austria, what are the typical tasks of data stewards? For that, we've interviewed data stewards in Austria and in other countries, and we've also analyzed job descriptions and job listings. And we've come up with these kind of 5 areas of tasks. Obviously, you have the advising role, helping researchers, for example, to create data management plans, or to set up sustainable workflows for their data management. They usually also conduct needs assessments, and they do requirements engineering. And they have this sort of bridging role in that they connect researchers with the research infrastructure. They usually also give training on RDM and are active in various national and international initiatives like the RDA. So in order to take on these tasks, data stewards need a huge array of various competencies, which we've grouped in these 4 areas. So you have the professional competence. and no surprises there. Obviously, data stewards need skills and knowledge in the area of research data management, but also open science, open research. Then there's the methodological competence, which is, for example, this ability to translate the needs of researchers to the research infrastructure. Then there are some personal competencies that can be helpful to data stewards, such as being patient and being creative and coming up with solutions for data management. But perhaps the most important competence of data stewards is communication. So kind of all of the tasks of data stewards are very much around their ability to communicate with various stakeholders. And so the next step we took was asking ourselves, how can we help emerging data stewards to acquire these competencies? And we've decided to set up this new certificate course. So there are several things that that were important to us in setting up the course. On the one hand, obviously there is the actual competence acquisition, but we very much wanted to support peer-to-peer learning, as in the participants of the course not only learn from teachers and trainers, but they also can benefit from the background and the experiences of each other, in order to have a data steward community and to support that community in Austria, but also internationally. So a few facts about the course. It is a part-time further education program, which is based on a certificate course that we used to offer called Data Librarian. And we've utilized a lot of the results of a currently running digitization project called Fair Data Austria. And we've also looked at several other further education programs, specifically these two in Germany. So when you finish the course, you get a certificate of the University of Vienna, and the course will be offered in English, and it is open internationally. So it's 15 credit points spread out over 2 semesters, and it costs a bit under 3,000 euros. And the goal is to prepare existing staff through upskilling, but also new staff for the role of data stewards. So with our target groups, we wanted to be very open, and we want to reach out to researchers, to PhD students, but also existing research support staff, such as people working in libraries, the IT departments, the legal departments. And when it comes to the prerequisites, you can take part in the course if you have a master's degree, but if you have a completed apprenticeship or a high school diploma, a bachelor's degree, and you can also show us your relevant work experience and kind of the area of like research support. This is also something we want to take into account, and we just want to show that we value like various backgrounds and various experiences, because research doesn't necessarily only happen within the context of higher education. So the course is split into 5 modules. And the first 2 are kind of the introductory modules. You have the introduction to RDM and open science on the one hand, and then some basics of IT applications and data science on the other. And as you see in the pyramid, these 2 courses really build the basis of the whole certificate course. So you touch upon many various topics in those first 2 modules, and then you kind of delve into detail in the 3rd module, which is the fair data and the research data lifecycle. And then in the module number 4, you kind of start translating the knowledge you've acquired into the typical tasks of data stewards. So you learn how to set up RDM support services and how to give training on RDM, but also how to conduct needs assessments. And then in the 5th module, you come up with your own project where you, for example, can develop your own training course on a specific topic. And the course, as I mentioned, the course is open internationally. So the idea is that only 1 week of the course takes place in Vienna, because we really want to support also kind of that social aspect, the networking, and building that community of data stewards. So that will be in October. but the rest of the modules are going to be conducted online. So here are a few more details about the individual modules. So it's not—
1 minute.
Thank you. It's not a discipline-specific course. It's open to any discipline, but we try to have some discipline-specific use cases and examples, especially in the third module. And if that's something that you find interesting and you might want to become a certified data steward at the University of Vienna, I encourage you to use the QR code or follow the link. I'm going to post it in the chat later as well. And I'll be happy to hear from you. And I would be very happy if you would also share the course with anybody else who might be interested. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Teresa, for that really great overview of the certification course that you've put together. I really appreciated the work that you did in first of all, looking at the competencies and regular tasks of the data stewards and then developing it from that point, as well as borrowing it from some of the previous courses around certification courses that you have around data librarianship. So thank you for that. Again, I would encourage people, if you have questions for the presenters, please do enter those in Slido. And then, Luigia, the floor is yours. Please go ahead and share your screen, and can't wait to hear about your pilot training course.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not talking about our general training program, but I will talk specifically about one implementation. It might be very technical. I hope that is still fitting the purpose of this meeting. So I'm Luigia. I have a background as a scientist and data manager, and I currently in charge of developing and conducting training and research data curation for the photon and neutron community. Our group is called HubMeta in the framework of the Helmholtz Metadata Collaboration, a national German initiative involving Helmholtz Association. Our focus is to support and promote fair practices in research data management. We sit at Helmholtz Zentrum Berlin. If you want to learn more about our initiative, I invite you to visit our landing page or to ask a question in the discussion session. So our training is conceived as a permanent service, and for this reason, I worked on the design, on the development of a training offer that is sustainable for this purpose. We wanted to acquire information about the training needs of our community and elaborate this information in order to provide modules of training that can be used, combined and reused for different training formats. We made use of a didactic structure to support the modularity and have some dynamic implementation of the training. We developed also dedicated tools for the training, and we decided to test our implementation with a pilot event. And we also developed an evaluation concept in order to review our first implementation and quickly update the necessary changes. For us was also very important to document and all the design and implementation phase in order to achieve a high level of transparency. We planned to acquire the information about the training needs of our community using community surveys. The information that is acquired is combined with the learning persona approach that looks quite effective for defining learning paths to identify which modules are common across the communities of the trainee communities that we have. We are trying to approach researchers as well as data stewards with different expertise in research data management. The didactic structure helped to develop our training course considering the achievement of learning outcomes as core part, but also helped to achieve this high level of transparency for the entire development phase. Our interest was also to develop an hands-on session that was highly interactive, because I think that the high interactivity is the one that is triggering the knowledge transfer, but also the development of skills and competencies and research data management. We also wanted to have the possibility to integrate in our training also data processing, data visualization tools that are available in the photon and neutron community. I spent quite some time for developing this hands-on session. Details about that are available in our poster that is still visible today. I prepared some Jupyter notebooks that were hosted in a GitLab repository for having the material always available before, during, and after the training. Let's go to the details of our pilot event. We had 2 days, 4 hours each, with 15 participants. They were all researchers. We introduced the FAIR principle. We presented the in-house tools for the data curation, ingestion, and publication. And also we presented the community standards for metadata and data format. Again, our interest was to promote a command line metadata editing before introducing the more complex tools. To conclude, we thought that it was also necessary to develop tools that would allow a systematic analytical evaluation of the entire training process. For this, we prepared a set of tools that are analyzing the different phases of this training. The evaluation committee is planned to be made by peers and participants. This part might be a bit complex. Here I wanted to show that for performing this evaluation, we defined some, let's say, quality parameters that are the indicators that are measuring the level of achievement for the different categories, the different aspects of the training that we want to measure. In addition to that, we prepared what are called rubrics, evaluation rubrics. This is a score system with some descriptors, and this is a kind of guided evaluation. This would guarantee the transparency in the evaluation analysis, but also the repeatability, and would allow also to follow the dependency of the quality measure with time. I'm strongly interested to discuss with the other trainers and service providers in the research data management training on the strategies to develop the training offer. That's why I thought that these pillars of our implementation would be worth to be presented to trigger discussion on this aspect.
30 seconds.
Yeah, looking forward to your question. I should not forget to acknowledge the contribution of my colleagues at Helmholtz Central Berlin and from the entire training group of the Helmholtz Metadata Collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Luisa. I'm really looking forward to the discussion around what you've done there. I especially think that rubric that was on your second to last slide there, showing the looking at the learning materials, the learning resources themselves. I hope you, I think you'll find some crossover, some interaction with some of the minimal metadata, as well as some of the more extended metadata that we've been developing in this group around learning resources as well. So I think there's some really nice intersections and applications there. Thank you very much for that. Let's see, our next presentation is meant to be made by Nancy Hübelheimich, if she has made it home in time. She has not. So the next presentation is going to be delivered by yours truly. One moment, please.
Nancy's just got here, by the way.
Oh, Nancy has just gotten here. Oh, what perfect timing. Well then, the next presentation will be delivered by Nancy, since she's made it, thankfully. And we'll be talking about one of the outputs from the previous work of this group, which is exactly around that metadata for learning resources, looking at the foundation application, and perhaps where we'll go in the future, which is the extension of this metadata apart from the minimal metadata, which is dealing with really the findability and accessibility of learning resources, and thinking more about the interoperability and reusability of these, which would align with, I think, the last maybe 2.5 boxes that we just saw in Luigi's rubric there around those learning materials. And so with that, Nancy, hello. And
Hi.
Hi, you've made it. And,
I did.
and you made it and you're up.
Oh,
so
okay.
Perfect timing there.
Okay.
I
And
can give you a minute to kind of orient yourself. In the meantime, I would invite people to consider what they've already heard so far and think about some of the parallels that we've heard around the different learning efforts that we've heard about, some of the places where similar work is being done. Perhaps those are areas that we can think about capitalizing on, about putting our efforts together in these spaces to learn from each other, so we don't reproduce the work. And thinking about those spots that maybe one group has really thought about that hasn't necessarily been covered by others, as ways of indicating how gaps can be called out and addressed as well in these areas, and thinking about how the work of this group can help in some of those spots as well. Nancy, are you ready to go?
Yes, just the only question is, are you sharing?
You can go ahead and share.
Share screen. Okay, let's hope that works then. So that should be this one. Okay, can you see what I've got here? I will.
Yeah, go ahead and
present
and you should be good.
Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, it's just just what I wanted to do. I'm speaking for the group, the minimal metadata group, which is a group of a varying number, but over 18 months, we had quite an interesting discussion about minimal metadata and came up with some good products, I think, that would represent both what the group is thinking, but also we definitely would love to get some feedback from people too about what we do. But let me jump into what that is. So what we're looking at now is the metadata that we've come up with, the recommendations we've come up with. I'm going to present kind of the foundation of how we came up with those things, the set, some ideas about application and efforts that we're going on into applying that minimal set, and then possibilities for extension as well. So just to give you a basic idea of what the essential goal of the minimal metadata group was, at the beginning of the discussions, and this was all based on a plenary discussion. I think that was from maybe 16 or 17, can't remember which, but it was pretty clear from the people who were involved in it that two things: people were not able to find learning resources as easily, meaning students were not as able to find learning resources as much as they wanted to, especially people coming from different learning sectors, from both formal and informal environments, and from different perspectives. So we thought that a core set that could be adopted by a number of these different, both the creators of the content and also service providers, might help facilitate the discovery of the resources. But at the same time, we knew that a lot of work had been done in this area as well. And so the idea was to try to both reduce duplication in what the different schemas are covering, but identify gaps as well among both existing and prospective learning resource providers. So the process we worked with was to first of all, build upon previous community work. As I say, a number of people had done this, and that was represented by the schemas that we looked at and compared across using the Learning Resource Metadata Initiative, the profile of LOM that the ENFRI people had done, EOSC pilot, which is a European Open Science Cloud pilot, also had some suggestions based on work that they've been doing for a couple of years. Bioschemas is another one, and then we compared all of them to what schema.org has been doing, both with learning resources and kind of in general. And then we looked at different user stories too, because we wanted to make sure we weren't coming out from our own little boxes. We looked at user stories for learners, trainers, service providers like catalogs and registries, developers, and funders. We did a little bit of mapping to FAIR principles, not as much as we would have liked to, but we had to kind of move on to some extent, and there was quite a bit of discussion about that and not much consensus really. And then we came up with a set. We got feedback from the different communities, including RDAs, different plenary sessions, and then compared them to what other people had done as recommendations as well. And also then, once we came up with a set, try to apply what we came up with to different learner perspectives from people looking for formal training resources, informal training resources, and professional education. So basically what we came up with was a set of 15 terms of fields or properties. Many of them, 6 of them were about descriptive information, the sort of thing that you would find in any kind of a catalog if you had a search facility associated with it, access information, and then educational information. And what you see linked here, the recommendations for a minimal metadata set, is the full report of what we've got. Invite you to go look at that in more detail. It also includes a lot of our background work that snapshots of what we were doing at that time, including the schema mapping. We have a dictionary that includes some examples, evidence of the user stories comparison that we did, and then some learner application snapshots from those different perspectives I talked about in terms of the formal, informal, and professional education. So that the DOI is there. It's considered an RDA output, and we'd love to have you look at it and also provide some feedback to us. The other thing that we came up with was a concern that we had too, which was that a lot of the catalogs and registries and portals have sometimes a short life. They're funded for a couple of years, but they don't necessarily live on. And so the idea of sustainability was really something that was very important to the group. So what we came up with was a set of what we call core characteristics of learning resource collectors, including those catalogs and registries and so on. So the areas that were covered again were the 5 categories of content descriptions, governance, services, and operations. And then the sort of what's after the bolding, there are some ideas, some areas that were covered, such as for content selection, collection, development policies, content descriptions. What are the description standards that you used? What's the policy for use and maintenance of persistent identifiers, etc. So the whole idea of the core characteristics was to provide, in some ways, almost questions about how were these kinds of topics, these sort of concepts covered, or were they covered for a different given learning registry, portal, or catalog. And obviously not all of them are going to apply to each one, because every one of these has different areas of focus and and range. But it still is something that would be really useful for people to look at. That, again, going back to that, this link, the DOI link, is the link to the output page, which has the core characteristics document there, as well as an appendix of different kinds of registries and portals that we looked at, to try to compare and come up with these characteristics. And then from the application point of view, there were a couple of things that we did during the process of settling on the
1 minute.
recommended set, which included implementation test beds. That's what's on the left side here. We're also working on creating application profiles, which are ways of allowing different kinds of stakeholders, essentially, or different kinds of registries, et cetera, to adapt the set to what they're doing. And what you see there are the people who are working with both on the application profile and the actually adopting it. And then finally, the next question really is, do we want to do something? Do we need to do something beyond that, beyond the minimal set? Part of certainly the schema has got many more fields or properties than just the minimal set. And the group is really interested in knowing whether that extended documentation would be important for reuse of learning resources, because that was the other concern we have. So we've got the schema mapping, it gives us a place to start, but hopefully part of what we can talk about here is part of the discussion is whether people think that's needed, whether anybody's interested in leading or participating in that work, and I'll leave it there. So if anybody has questions, happy to answer or whatever.
Great. Thank you for that, Nancy. Thank you to all of our presenters very much. Really some informative and enlightening areas of work, and it's great to see those in action. So now we're going to go ahead and move into our question and discussion portion. And thank you all so much for entering some of those questions into the the Q&A session on Slido. Also, please feel free to enter your questions in chat as well. So let's go ahead and start out with Liz. Back to you. Inquiring minds would like to know, if you could talk to your past self before you started the succession process, what advice would you give?
That's a great question. I think I would tell myself that it's a long game, and instead of trying to provide the answer in the content, it is really worthwhile considering the value proposition to a range of audiences. Not everyone has to agree on the benefits, I think, but you need to be able to reach what is in it for each different stakeholder. So that's something I've certainly learnt in starting this. And again, it's worthwhile realizing that, the way things are set up are okay, because that's the establishment and setting up process. And things will naturally change as services, collaborations mature, and you learn from your successes and mistakes.
Well, thank you very much for that response, Liz. I really appreciate that. Moving on, Teresa, we have a lot of questions for you, but I would like to go ahead and start out with one of the later ones that asks about, was there any data that you ended up collected in terms of learner motivations for pursuing this course, for pursuing this certification? Why did learners choose to do this course?
That is a very good question. Well, what we've done basically is, in terms of motivation of learners, was talk to people who are already data stewards and talk to them about what they would have liked to have in terms of training and education for their role. So it was more kind of like looking back at what would have been helpful to them and why they might have chosen this course had it been available at the time. So we weren't like looking kind of completely broadly at, because that would be very difficult to kind of, because we have this very broad target group, it will be very difficult to pinpoint a sort of group of people to look at. So that's kind of the way we went about that. But that's something we're kind of talking to people interested in the course now. It's a bit more informal, but we try to document that as much as possible. Like when we have people reach out to us interested in the course. but it's not really like a kind of formal data collection strategy.
It's an anecdotal data
Very much
collection
so, yes.
strategy. All
Very
right,
much
well,
so.
thank you very much for that. Another question for you, Teresa. How hard was it to get certification for the course? Get like
I'd
the
say,
certification status.
yeah, I'd say fairly. So there's like a formal process we had to go through at the University of Vienna, where if you want to set up a certificate course, this is kind of almost on the level of a degree program, but not really. So all of the certificate courses the university offers are offered as the Center of Postgraduate Studies, where you can actually also complete a full degree program. So it's kind of like a quicker version of the same process of setting up a new degree program, where you have to provide you have to like write up a proposal, you have to provide the curriculum that you're planning to do, and also possible lecturers that could be teaching the course. And then you have to go through like several hearings with various committees, and it's the management directorate of the university that ultimately decides whether or not this course will get that certification or not. And it took a good part of a year to get this done.
Thank you for that, Teresa. I appreciate the insights there. Luigi, I'm going to turn to you now with a question here about the rubrics that seems to have a lot of popularity. We all love the rubrics because we're in it for the learning. And so were the rubrics, did they end up being used by learners for self-assessment or by trainers to assess the learners? Like, was it a self-assessment or was it an external assessment?
So we have one set ready for the learners for the self-assessment. And another set is supposed to be used by peers to evaluate the training events. So for instance, one example is to measure how the training material is reusable. But we are not planning yet to evaluate if the learners achieved the learning goals.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that insight there about the different rubrics. Is there a reason that you've held off on, or what is the reason that you've held off on that kind of external assessment of the learner's progress or achievements?
This is mostly due to the fact that we don't have a learning program set yet. So we prepare this material for the pilot. That's why we could not follow any progress of the learners for a specific amount of time. That's why for the moment we didn't prepare anything. This does not mean that we don't consider to do this.
All right. Thank you for that response. I appreciate it. Nancy, turning to you now, your last slide was being like, we have more work to do here. Who would like to join us? Who would like to lead it? Oh, from your experience, what does doing this work, what does leading this work require? What does that look like?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's the people who are interested in this topic have a lot of experience in a number of different areas. And I think part of the thing that's both fascinating about it and kind of challenging in a way is to understand everybody's points of view, but also move forward and get to where you want to go. But the other thing that's nice about the group of people that has been working on it, and people will, I think a lot of those who were involved still want to be involved because there's a lot of interest in kind of making sure that the resources are really reused, especially as more and more of them are being created in for different environments. And when assessment comes into the picture too of the resources, you know, there's an opportunity, a lot of opportunity for people who are real experts to become known as experts and to kind of, you know, raise the both their own credibility, but also the value of that kind of experience and expertise. So the thing that's important to do, I think, from the point of view of getting somewhere is being clear about, and I'm not saying that the leader necessarily does this, but just soliciting from the group, polling from the group, what are the 1 or 2 goals and how to really get there so that you can scope the work. And particularly with extended documentation, a lot of times when we were doing the comparisons between schemas and talking about minimal versus extended, that is another barrier, but a moving target kind of, there's a lot of discussion about whether this should be extended, this should be minimal. I think in some ways it will be easier to continue the discussion because that minimal set has been established. And also because the main focus that the group has come up with so far is the importance of reuse of resources. So, that's kind of like a goal that I think people can understand. And so there could be very interesting discussions about what will actually facilitate that in terms of describing resources by content creators and by, and making available through the stakeholders that we've identified before. So we've got a good start. The scheme, as I said, and the work we've done is a good start, but it needs somebody who's got interest and energy to do that.
Thank you for that, Nancy, certainly for the insight there on the, I know what has been a lot of dedication from a small but very persistent group of people in getting this work done. And certainly there are a couple of votes of confidence for that focus on the minimal metadata standard in the Q&A if you take a look there. So well done to focus on that minimal part first. I'd like to turn now to you, Hugh, and the handbook that you worked on developing, and really interested in your insights about how you see that intersecting with the pilot that Luisa talked about, with the certification course that Teresa talked about. And do you see it intersecting with those? Do you see it learning from those? Do you see how it might be used in setting up other certification or learning pilot courses as well? And you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no. So I guess it's a two-way. It's here we're talking about I think a two-way street. So the how to be fair with your data handbook, it's all open, people use it as they wish. So if there are courses such as what Teresa and Luigi are doing, and can sort of take that and run with it, then go with our absolutely that's fantastic. We'll just probably send you questionnaires and say, but also there's the flip side of it, which is again the lessons that have been learned from running those things, and again saying, oh, okay, we've developed a lesson plan here in this area, or indeed we don't talk particularly about things like, I mean, it's really interesting to hear Teresa and Luigi's experience with say assessment and so on, saying, oh, okay, well, what's the assessment that works here? Those things, again, it would be great if those things could, those experiences could again be sort of collated into the handbook, kind of going forward. Now, of course, to stress, don't want to sort of see this as being empire building and the only is one source of information, but it's at least if it's a useful avenue of information, then great, please use it and work with it that way. I hope that sort of addresses the points you wanted me to, Amy, there.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Hugh. Definitely. Now, one more question for you, Teresa. There was a question about how some researchers are like open science evangelists. They're in it for all the open science, and some are not yet of the converted. They don't have that expression so far. And from your experience, do you have suggestions for encouraging this adoption of open science principles? Anything you've seen in the practice of this certification?
That's a very, very good question. To be honest, most people I've met, which might not be the experience of everyone, but most researchers that I've met that weren't super keen on open science usually thought that their research is not interesting enough to others. Kind of helping them see that whatever they're doing is actually interesting and would be relevant to people even outside their discipline, which is usually something many researchers perhaps cannot imagine if they work in a discipline that's perhaps a bit more, closed off and not as interdisciplinary maybe as others. I find that that's quite a good strategy to use. And generally speaking, I work more on the RDM side of things. So obviously you have that more of that ideal of fair, which is always a good argument, which does not necessarily mean being all completely open. It wouldn't be feasible or at all something we strive for, obviously, because there are many good reasons for not making research outputs open. So that's always also something that you can use as to encourage people to, and fair doesn't necessarily only apply to data, right? So which is something we've been talking a lot about fair software in the last couple of days. So it's always something that can be helpful.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Teresa. I've had very similar experiences myself. Either the researchers are like, yeah, no one's going to care about my data, or they're like, my data is so precious, everyone's going to want it and I must protect it all. So yes, finding the middle ground and which conversational points work best with the multitude of perspectives in that space. I'd like to, for the last few minutes that we have for the discussion period, for talking about some of these efforts in the education space, really turn back to the rest of the participants. If you've not been able to ask the question that has been burning in your mind, or if you would like to share an experience of how you think you might of either delivering something similar to what we've heard about today, or how you might use some of the resources or questions that you have about that, go ahead and I would invite you to unmute yourself and just ask that question.
So, Amy, I suppose I'll jump in, which is not, you kind of raised that, you put into the Slido this sort of general question that you had for people to say, well,
Yeah,
what's the next
that's our
goal?
next 15 minutes. So thank you for the brilliant segue.
Well, in that respect, I'll shut up then, because you've got that scheduled. So yeah.
So thank you again, Hugh, for that brilliant segue as we move into the rest of our 15 minutes, was just really talking about what is the next work for this group? What are the areas of future work in the space of education and training on handling research data that meets the global needs, and thinking about how we're going to move forward for those goals for P20. Again, for that, if you go ahead and look at that Slido site, you can see what people have entered under the ideas section. And if you would like to put an idea in there, I invite you to do so now. Or if you see an idea that you really like, go ahead and give that a thumbs up. And one of the, while you cogitate there, while you think about that, there is something I had forgotten to mention earlier about this group, and that is we are inviting new chair applications. So if you are inspired, interested, curious about the work of this group and I think that you might like to take a larger role in thinking about education and training for handling research data on this global scale, thinking about what are these applications, what are these efforts in these spaces, we invite you to think seriously about that by becoming a co-chair of this group. I think following this plenary, we'll go ahead and send out an email to the list. So please make sure that you're signed up for the interest group. You can do that on the RDA site at the wiki that we mentioned before. And you'll get that invitation to express your interest for a chairship. As always in RDA, we are looking for geographical balance as well as disciplinary balance. So, and really we invite all comers to the space and look forward to seeing like who's interested and where your ideas might take this group next. So turning to some of those ideas that have been offered, I think, Liz, you were very responsible and put your idea in the question box, and it's way too long to go in the ideas section in the Slido. So I apologize for that the technology is just incapable of meeting that idea there. But if you'd like to talk about that a little bit, I invite you to do that now with the Cure Fair working group.
An exhortation to curate my own words. In a nutshell, and maybe this is very similar to Hugh's prompt about we have these resources now, how do people use them? And can this group put some effort into evaluating and identifying what is the work involved in applying these resources to reach an impact?
Yeah, thank you for that idea. I think that's an interesting space to think about, that the work of this group in is like where it's part of what we've talked about for some of these efforts, and thinking about what is the impact of that? How do we get to that idea of what we think impact is? I know it's also been a topic that we've talked about in kind of that extended metadata application when we're thinking about, having learning resources be reused for someone. How do we help someone make the decision that that learning resource is fit for use, right? That it has an impact, that it's worthy of reuse. How do we assess the quality of it, which is always a very difficult question to answer within that space, and thinking about that. So thank you for those thoughts, Liz. I'd like to bring out some of the other ideas that have been offered, thinking about the interoperability, reusability, the metadata standards and data documentations. So thinking about those things, again, I think this really does fall into some of the extended metadata discussions that we've had about, when we're thinking about developing learning resources, when we're thinking about, do I really have to redevelop this learning resources, or does it already exist out there somewhere? Being able to identify what does exist and how it might be productively used for whatever our particular learning application might be. So thinking about those standards and developing that. And I think that goes again to the point that you raised, Hugh, about really exploiting the niche that this group has developed, and thinking about recommendations on the back end of actually developing those learning resources, about how we connect with our people who are developing the learning resources, so that they can provide some of this information that's going to help others assess the reusability, the interoperability. How can these pieces get plugged in together in those spaces, and thinking about that. Nancy, yeah, please.
Yeah, that raises another question that Hugh asked on the Q&A side, and that has to do with whether the group that has been working on things has been thinking about documentation, helping the content creators understand how best to describe their resources so that others can use it. And that we've talked about writing some guidance in terms of examples and all kinds of things. And so that's definitely something that I think could be would be useful for the minimal set, but also as she's trying to explore what content creators, what time they have, what kind of information they have available, and would be willing to put into the description of what they do right off the bat. It would be, I don't think people necessarily understand how important that kind of documentation is. So writing some guidance in that area is definitely something that would be useful to do. And I imagine, people who've been doing this, creating content and working in schools and so on, as you have been doing, Hugh, would have lots to offer in that area too, because you've been teaching for a long time, and not only researchers, but also the curators and stewards who are creating this content and delivering it. So be a good way to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely in that space. And I think there's some more support for that in one of the other ideas that was offered around just having that practical information on delivery and evaluation. How long does it actually take from trainer to learner from a program delivery perspective? So really, again, being able to demonstrate in the description of a learning resource, what is it going to demand from the instructor? What does it look like for the learner's experience, and being able to create a more defined, a better defined structure for bringing this information together in a way that does make it digestible, so that it's easy to understand when you go out and look for a learning resource, exactly what that's going to mean for you in those spaces. So one of the other, we're getting all sorts of ideas here now. Thank you so much for this. So one of the other ideas that's popped up is thinking about broad standards of data competencies at an international level. And I think there are certainly efforts we see being made in these spaces. And it's one of those, if you look, even some of the past efforts of this particular group, it started out with those very goals of looking at competencies for data sciences, data stewards, data librarians. And one of the efforts in that space, if you're interested in looking at that, was the Edison project. And I'm sorry, I don't have the link to hand right this moment, but someone else might. But that did a really nice job of laying out a full catalog of competencies. And I think we saw the same as well. I think it was today's in your presentation, there was that nice blue visual of the different competencies as well. And thinking about those general statements of competencies and how they can be adapted to a specific situation. So I think there might be some room there for this group to create a generalized guidance on like competency areas or competency types, but within that guidance also leave space for that understanding of perspectives and application to particular national context, disciplinary context, cultural contexts in those types of spaces as well, because there often is that delicate balance, as well as a certain tension between the general standard versus what it actually looks like when it's applied in institution X type thing. So I think that's an interesting area to explore. And what I'd like to do with some of these is have these put out to take these ideas and have them put out to a poll for the community to, thank you, Nancy, for that link to the Edison project, to either talk about or to expand upon or vote up or down as a way to identify some of the future work for this group as we go forward. Digital badging of RDM skills. I think that's a little bit contingent on the previous topic about the international standards for what some of those competencies are. That would be the first step before we get to the digital badging of those skills or competencies. And I like this, the baseline RDM training for content creators who aren't necessarily from research or for higher education sector. I don't know who entered that one, but whoever you are, would you mind discussing that a little bit further? All right.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, so my name is Adeline, and I'm the person who entered that. So by baseline RDM training, what I have in mind is some kind of maybe basic training for people who aren't necessarily from a research background. So for myself, for example, I'm a learning designer with the Australian Research Data Commons, but my background is really in education. So in order to be able to produce quality work, one area which I thought might be a possible area to explore would be some kind of baseline training to quickly get up to speed on what research data management is about, but the target audience being people who don't have this kind of a background.
Yeah, thank you for that idea, Adeline. And I think you're absolutely right that that is a need that many people feel, to be like, okay, where do I start with this? And I think there's, again, sorry, it's almost midnight. We're so close. So my mind is kind of blanking out on this. But there was a wonderful kind of training tools within that space that the University of Edinburgh had put together. Robin worked on this. Does anyone remember the actual name of the project that I'm thinking of? I see quizzical looks in there, but there is something, and I will find it and I will put it in notes so that we have it available. But I think this is still, yes, Mantra. Thank you, Liz. That's the one I'm thinking of. But that did do a really great job of providing some of that, just based on what are the basics here, what are the general areas that I need in order to get an essential grounding, so I at least like have the language to ask questions about this, because that's often the first barrier, is that you don't even have the language to be able to really engage in a conversation within a specific area. And I think being able to identify that as a need, thank you for that, Aileen, for bringing that up again, as a continuing need for people to be aware of these resources that do exist, or for looking at how resources can be refreshed to make way for some of the new language and issues that have come into being when we start thinking about management for research software. For instance, this is definitely hold hands with thinking about, management for research data as part of understanding that research data overall in those spaces. So thank you for those ideas. Thank you everyone for your participation in this session. I've really enjoyed hearing about these different efforts, and I hope that you have as well. I would encourage you to continue to make use of Slido to enter your further ideas. And as we go forward in thinking about how we develop the work of this group and thinking about, creating, I think we got quite a few votes of confidence there, Nancy, for that extended metadata group. So there will be a call going out for those people who are like, yes, this is a good idea. We're going to come back to you and say, like, how good of an idea did you think it really was? Like, was it good enough for you to work on? Because that's honestly, that's the important part. The idea needs to be good enough for you to commit to doing some work on it. And it's not like all your work, but little pieces of work will really help the community together to build these resources so that we can benefit from these resources together as a community. So it's not just one group or one person kind of carrying that load, but coming together to think about the community needs and build something that none of us could make alone for that wider benefit of the community. But thank you all again very much. I would encourage you to take a look at, again, go ahead, please sign up at the wiki for the ETA, for the Education and Training on the Handling Research Data group if you haven't already. And we will be putting out the information and the recording link as the session closes up. Thank you for those extra resources as well. The MOOC course that Stella has put into chat, definitely a nice thing to include. And yes, thank you as well, Julian Ritter. We're getting a lot more attention into citizen scientists and the roles that they can play in managing their own data and understanding some of the requirements for that as well. Thank you all again very much. And I hope you have a good rest of your waking period, whatever that waking period might be for you. And enjoy the rest of the plenary. I hope to see you around.